Hari Haraye Namaha. Hari Haraye Namaha.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome to the 17th episode of the Many Moons podcast. Today, we've joined by a very special guest, Ananda Vrindavaneswari Devi Dasi, who is the president of ISKCON Washington, D.C. She's an educator by profession and a writer and a speaker by interest and inspiration. Her leadership direction is nourished by the six values in the Gita and the practice of bhakti and the writings of great poets and thinkers through the ages. And she is married to Vrajavihari Das and has one son, Gopinath. We're very, very grateful that she's given us her valuable time to join us to discuss the topic leadership as education. So, very welcome to the podcast, Ananda Prabhu. And yeah, thank you for your time and agreeing to speak with us. And I'd like to start off the conversation with, I think, what is a rather apt question that the viewers at home that may not know anything about you would like to know, I'm sure. So, you serve as the temple president of ISKCON Washington, D.C., as I mentioned earlier. What led you to accepting this service?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be here. I had just finished up service in Vrindavan it was around 2010, and was just taking a year back to reflect. And in that year, I was invited to consider being temple president at Washington, D.C. So one thing led to another, and after a year, I was ready to do some managerial service again. So I said yes.
So, did you do similar service in Vrindavan, Prabhu? Because you said you were ready to do managerial
Yeah.
service again. So, I'm assuming you did something leadership there.
Yeah, I was involved with the Gurukula there, both as a teacher and then in the position as principal I was in Vrindavan for 20 years. So a good 15 years of that was involved with the school.
Wow, that's great. And what do you think? I mean, when we say leadership positions, particularly, being a temple president is no mean task, And what would you think were the main challenges you've had to overcome in fulfilling your service or duty as the temple president or leadership position, really?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are lots of challenges. I mean, life is full of challenges, but if you're in a position of managing or leading or organizing a group of people, I think some of the challenges that I have faced and continue to face is managing stress, finding the balance and managing the stress around sadhana, my spiritual practice and service. Because there can be lots of management headaches, as Prabhupada called them, and they, it's hard to switch from one mode to another. I used to find in the school as well, when I was involved more in an admin capacity, it would be hard for me to switch into teaching out of admin. So I think that's an ongoing challenge for me, and not to lose the joy of service, not to lose the spirit of service around whatever managerial issue or challenge is there. I think the balance between making change, creativity, and innovation, as well as keeping things the same. There's a challenge around mission and money. Finances can be a big source of tension. Mm-hmm. And I think there's challenges around expectations and reality. both my own expectations for myself and, wanting to do so much more than I can do, or other people's expectations of me, be it managerial competency or just, my position as a devotee, right? And those are a few. I think other challenges as well include trying to practice trust, because I think trust is just such an essential key to leadership and management. But the practice of that can be a challenge. The practice of caring for devotees can be a challenge. There's also the challenge of negativity and criticism and, controversy and politics. We're an organization that teaches transcendence, but we're very much rooted in the world and have faced many, if not all, of the same organizational challenges that any organization would have. And I think another big challenge is also finding the balance between people and projects, which is kind of similar to men and money, so to speak. But how to value people over projects, and yet, people make projects, people do projects, balancing that idea of results, right? The process along with the results. So those are some of the challenges I thought about when I saw that question.
Yeah, so how do you say you find ways to overcome this? Because you may raise some very valid points about, we're very much focused often in these days as a leader, or the expectation is, at work as well, I've got KPIs to deliver, and you're so focused on the outputs. You need these results, whether it be, your value for money or whatever. So how do you said, challenging, you find it challenging, managing the stress of it, balancing those duties alongside your sadhana, which I think particularly for ladies, as mothers, as as mothers and partners, wives, it can be quite challenging with childcare and everything. So how would you say, we could overcome these challenges in a healthy and positive ways, or how have you managed to overcome some of these challenges?
I think being aware of them, like naming them, is the first step. I remember many years ago, I was at a gathering of temple presidents. This was a long time ago. And we had an opportunity to say what we would like to talk about. And I said, well, I'd like to talk about stress. But most of the others were saying, no, yeah, we're fine. We don't need to talk about stress. And so I was thinking perhaps I was the only one that was finding it a stressful service. So for me, I think identifying those areas of challenge, so that you can, you know what to watch out for. I think taking breaks, just on practical level, taking breaks and keeping yourself physically fit, mentally fit. Small things like knocking off your phone and not getting on your phone until after you finished your morning sadhana. So just constantly, when you're talking about balance, and life is just simply a series of interruptions. And so then you just have to recognize when you're exhausted and step back, or recognize when, you really need to have a good time chanting, right? You need to get back into your sadhana back online. There may have been an event, there may have been so many things. So it's the practice of getting things back into balance, which I think really in one sense is what leadership is all about, because you're holding space for balance for the whole community, but you have to hold that for yourself. And so it's also about identifying other people who can do things that may be challenging for you. For example, me, I have to deal with some financials, but I have people who know how to manage that a lot better. So I don't need to get my head around a lot of that. So you have to be smart as a manager. You have to be smart as a leader. On one level, it's about self-preservation, because if you burn out, you're no good for anybody, and you can't really serve or support others, which is really what the job of leadership is, that you're able to show up in good mood and good energy for others. So yeah, it's a lot of just restoring and rebalancing, removing at times. If you have to remove things from your life, that's just way too stressful, and or adding, things that you need to, again, keep good boundaries, and find grounding again.
I think the point you mentioned, Prabhu, around acknowledging it, where you went to this summit and you said you were stressed. I think, particularly, I mean, from my experience working in managerial jobs or managing teams, and actually, one of my managers confided in me was, we were going through a very difficult time with lots of deadlines and what have you. And she said sometimes, particularly women, are encouraged not to show that they're stressed, or that they're struggling to manage, because then it's often seen as a weakness. But she said actually the one time she was vulnerable, where you were to an extent, and said, look, I'm really struggling, these deadlines are not practical, and I'm not supported. And she said actually she nearly broke down crying in front of the directors, and that actually took her to show that emotion, to for them to actually acknowledge, oh, actually this lady needs supporting, the team is not resourced well. So I think it's a very good point. It's just acknowledging, but also not being afraid to sort of say that actually I'm struggling, I need help, and be honest about it, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The first step of humility is honesty. And life will just be overwhelming from time to time. And that's just humanness. That's just the nature of the world, or the nature
Mm.
of what's on our plate. So to be able to have someone to say that to be able to, not necessarily, you to say it to your in charge, but to have
Mm.
somebody that you can say it to, that um, this is all a bit overwhelming and I need, and
Mm.
generally just taking a break, just taking a day or two, it can, you know, bring it down. Because most of the stress obviously comes in our mind. Most of the stress
Of
is
course.
about, you know, putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, which may not be coming from others. Not only acknowledging it, but then really trying to be introspective and find out what is that source. And also, the most important thing we need to protect in leadership is not only devotees, and because that's the whole purpose of the movement, to facilitate devotional service and facilitate people's relationship with Krishna. So you have to really, really look out for that in yourself. Um, I've seen people really sacrifice their spiritual practice for service, which is
Mm.
nice for a while, but I don't think that that's what Prabhupada ultimately wanted. Now, for others, and if we look through the Varnashram lens, you can also see that there's different times of people's lives, or there's different
Mm.
inclinations of people. I have in our temple, some of us are real morning program people, and others are real evening, night. They love to be at the temple at night.
Mm.
And Varnashram means everybody's valued, and we make room for everybody. And some at our temple are really, we love to read, we love the books, we love the philosophies. Others are just love to serve, love to serve, love to serve. So leadership is also about finding how to best facilitate a person, not just in the box, but in their personal life and their personal needs. How can we help them serve? How can we help them grow spiritually? Talking about leadership and education, it's really all about how do I help a person be better,
Mm.
and be his best self or her best self, whatever that looks like for them. So it's nuanced.
Mm.
But certainly, if I'm able to acknowledge this is overwhelming for me, I'm able to say to others, I know at times it can get overwhelming. Living in a temple, for example, can
Mm.
be very overwhelming because you're right close to Krishna, and there's all kinds of, you know, living anywhere. It's family, and
Mm.
family has their stuff. But I think when I'm able to acknowledge it for me, I'm better able to make room for it in others, right? And I'm better able to say to them, take a day, a health day, or
Mm.
take a break for a couple of weeks, and they don't feel like there's something wrong with them, because I'm saying retreat is a form of attack. If you don't retreat and get strong, you're not going to last in the long run. So I think leadership starts with you, with me, and if I'm able to take care of myself, then it's easier for me to take care of others, if that makes
No.
sense.
No, no, makes perfect sense. Really helpful, Prabhu. And one thing, I mean, you just touched upon the concept or idea of leadership, but we also mentioned management or being managerial at the beginning. And also, these two words, leadership and management, often are used interchangeably. So, what
Yeah.
is the difference between leadership and management? Or what's the difference between being a leader, so to speak, and a manager?
Yeah. In one sense, they're very similar. And, a manager has to lead, and
Mm,
a leader manages in terms of keeping an eye on things, or, your leader may have managers and your managers may be managing others underneath them. So, but I think both, Prabhupada once said, manager means clean, which basically means organized. And people say, management is on the ground, leadership is
mm,
in the air. But, I've seen the best leaders on the ground, right?
mm.
Interacting with and serving alongside with. So I think managers should be leaders. And I think leadership really means you care about the people you work with. A good manager cares to be organized so that the people he works with or works under him can function really well. I think leadership and management are always pushing on, trying to adjust things, trying to change things. Maybe a leader has a long-term vision. I would say maybe there's so much similarity, but I would also say a leader really has to remind people of the North Star. They have to really remind people, here's why we're doing this. Here's why we're taking on this management headache for Prabhupada, because he's trying to please Krishna. So I think it's important that leaders are able to stand back and not and have some space to be able to hold space for others, whereas a manager really may be more on the ground and involved. But I think it's a chincha beta beta tattva a little bit. They're simultaneously one
But
and
different.
also different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting it. I've never thought of leadership and management as actually the way the top, but it's true because I think I've often heard that the significant. I think Bhakti Swami mentions it in his the spiritual warrior series. I've read
Mm.
one of the books and I'm halfway through it, and he says actually a leader inspires people. Something that you touched upon. A leader facilitates other people to get things done and to kind of sort of almost come with them, take the people that they manage or lead on a journey, whereas a manager often is more task orientated or gets the things done. So that's one of the things, or the differentiating points between a leader and a manager that I've come across. But you're right, I think a leader needs to be able to manage as well. A leader will have to, automatically manage other people that they lead by default, right?
Yeah, and it's not as it, I've learned over the years that it's not so much it's like I say we're going here and we're all going here,
Mm,
or it's not so much directing, but it's much more really empowering.
empower.
And so you really have to, and this comes to education and the
Mm,
extension of trust, right? So you're saying, yeah, this is where we're trying to go, but how best to get there? And somebody says, oh
mm,
yeah, I think we should do it this way. You're like, great, let me get out of my way, because
mm,
let me know what you need to help you do that. And so leadership is really, as education, is kind of drawing out of the person,
mm,
their innate skills and talents, so that you're not, again, it's not so much about control and directing, but it's more
mm.
about listening, guiding, supporting. and really helping those who are gathering to serve or to work together. Like, it's collective intelligence there, it's collective wisdom, there's creativity like crazy all over the place. And how do we unleash that? And how do we Sorry, I got cut off. I think I'm back.
Yeah, you are back, Prabhu. So you said, I think I caught you up to the point where you said there's so much creativity in how I think you were talking about how you then, as a leader, bring it together to facilitate something. I think that
Yeah.
was the gist of what you were saying.
Yes. 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 Basically, that you draw from the collective, and then you're able to move the group forward, but less about, I say you do, but more about
Mm,
how are you saying, and how can I help you do?
mm. Actually, and I was just thinking, we talked about, what makes what kind of barriers you have to overcome in terms of being a leader and certain kind of things that you could do to overcome these leadership challenges. We also now touched upon, perhaps the difference between, or the similarities and differences between a leader and a manager. But what leadership principles did you learn from Prabhupada? Because you mentioned Prabhupada always said this leadership or managerial headache. But what leadership principles did you learn from Prabhupada?
Okay, great question. Of course, one of them, Prabhupada mentions famous letter to Kurandar. Prabhupada mentions the devotees should be inspiration, individual, spontaneous, and voluntary. That how they should function in a temple. You acknowledge their individuality. You remember that they're here voluntarily, and it's spontaneous. And I've always been struck by that because it was a principle. I was trained as a Montessori teacher before I was a devotee, before I joined ISKCON, and I was really taken with her approach to education, which is really these three principles. She really based her classroom structure on the individual child, that there was free choice, voluntary choice to work and learn with a certain type of material, and it was spontaneous. You could stick with that activity as long as you wanted, because that's how learning happens, when you're absorbed, when you're connected, when you're deeply connected. She would call it drawing out the spirit of the child. So I think Prabhupada had this understanding that devotional service really is, he was trying to draw out this spontaneous mood of devotion from us, all the while recognizing our individuality and recognizing how can a leader or how can a community really work with that energy of ISV. Now, there's a few other Prabhupada's things. I mean, Prabhupada was never afraid to try things. When something wasn't working, he would try other things. He wasn't afraid to take risk. Of course, Prabhupada also had super strong sadhana, and he was very, very regulated, which is really a protection. Like, regulation is really a protection for all of us, but particularly if you're in a high pressure situation. What I loved about Prabhupada, he knew what the most important thing service was for him to do, which was his writing of his books, his translations. And so he would really block off a lot of time for that every day to do that. And, he also, of course, was very much in line with the disciplic succession. So his true north, he was always aligned to true north, although he was really creative in how he tried to figure out how best to fulfill his mission. And another thing I was thinking about Prabhupada this morning was how, he went to New York, eventually got there, and was really trying like anything to get help from India. Then that wasn't happening. So then he decided he would just see how Krishna arranged, and had, some stragglers came in, and he began something in 26 Second Avenue. And then probably a year later, no more, he left that to go off and start something else in San Francisco. And, he could have stayed in New York. He could have really grounded his whole movement there and gone deep and wide and, built and built in this. But he kept planting seeds of inspiration and sending people off and telling, don't worry, Krishna will help you. I mean, he was extraordinary in that ability to really build his mission on his relationship with his disciples and his trust in Krishna and trust in the holy name and trust in them. And often they failed, but he never gave up. So there's so much to learn from Prabhupada. Just his ability to make everybody feel like they were of value and they had something to offer. So he was an acharya because he actually, walked the teachings in how he spread the teachings.
Yeah, he really walked the talk. I mean, yeah, that's leaders often we say lead by example, and Prabhupada did just exactly that. Nobody could point the fingers and said, "Oh, you don't chant your rounds." You couldn't point fingers. He had a spotless record in terms of leading and leadership. Leading by example in that sense.
Yeah, and he cared, and he protected. Like when his devotees at some point, people were criticizing them, he protected. He stood up for them. He cared. He cared for them on physical levels. He cared for them on spiritual levels. So many disciples will say, I felt Prabhupada really cared about me. That's leadership. That's why people will surrender their life to Prabhupada and Krishna, because they feel they care.
And the amount of letters he wrote, is probably that testament to how much he cared. I mean, nowadays we struggle to reply to a text message we get. He hand wrote, how many thousands of hundreds and hundreds of letters to devotees. Every single person probably that wrote got a response. Irrespective of where he was, and whilst traveling, writing so many books, he still found the time to genuinely offer that care.
And it wasn't a sentimental care either. It wasn't wishy-washy, because he was strong and he was tough. But he was a teacher also. He taught and he, he transformed people's lives by the practice and by his strictness, right? He really saw there is a soul lost in there, and I will pull you out if you follow. And so he had this brilliant combination of being really deep and grave and strong and strict, but also kind and loving and generous and just beautiful. So yeah, he had a magic about him.
Certainly did. And you just touched upon what you kind of learned in terms of leadership principles from Prabhupada. But are there any other sources within the Shastras that inspire or make you form your sort of principles on how you lead?
Yeah, well, there's a couple. Well, I've learned over the years also just the power of listening as a skill for management or leadership. But as I mentioned in my bio, that I really work with the Gita values. Now, these were 6 values that were put together by a group of thoughtful devotees a number of years back, extracted from the Bhagavad Gita. And there's 6 values. 2 speak to kind of clarifying or strengthening our vision. 2 speak to our deeds, our actions, how we can interact with the world. And 2 speak to our character. So the first 2 values from the Gita on vision is, of course, samadarshana, equal vision, and also choice or desire. So this idea of individuality. So samadarshana, actually just seeing everybody different externally, but spiritually the same, connected to Krishna. We're all related. We're all connected, right? Samadarshana. And not only just humans. It's a real vision of unity, right? Samadarshana. we all belong. And then Icha, or choice. You know, at the very end of the Gita, where Krishna, after Arjuna disclosed his challenge, they discussed, question back and forth. Krishna said, "So now you've heard me, so please decide what you're going to do." And choice is a very helpful way when you're working with people to know that, and especially when you're working in a volunteer organization like ISKCON, that they have a choice to be there or not, and you need to honor that choice, and you need to acknowledge that choice. And just because I say they should do something doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. The other two values for actions or deeds, they're ahimsa, causing the least amount of violence, and acharya, actually walking your talk. Now, all of these values also, for me, they are ways to be trustworthy and also to give trust, right? So if we live by this, how can I cause the least amount of harm by how I interact with people? There's so much in our teachings about this. Or acharya, how can I walk my talk? If I say something, I should keep my word. If I'm asking other people to do something, I need to do it, right? We pull ourselves down all the time just because we will set rules. We'll do this at the temple. We'll set things in place, and just because devotees live at the temple, they're like, okay, well, I can go. So, the acharya principle and ahimsa, causing the least amount of pain or suffering. And again, that doesn't mean sentimental, everything's wonderful. It also means sometimes being really, to be clear is to be kind, right? And so you might need to say to somebody, hey, it's not working for you at the temple. You need to find a better place to be. So, because to keep a person in a particular position or in a particular location that's not working for them is not helpful, and it could be seen as harmful. So this is a good principle for all of us to stop and think, how can I best navigate the situation so that we all win, right? And then the last two on character, of course, it's humility and affection. And if people feel you have affection for them, and genuine affection, and again, not that you love everybody and people drive you nuts from time to time, but affection based on Krishna consciousness, right? Humility based on Krishna consciousness, that I can't do anything without everybody else, right? We need each other. And humility really means making room for the other, whether it's another person's thoughts or opinions or struggles. So, and humility means I'm there in a mood of service and I'm ready to do whatever is needed to help keep the wheels turning in Prabhupada's temple. So these 6 Gita values, equal vision, choice, ahimsa, acharya, and humility and affection, for me, they create this great foundation for a culture of trust. And when you talk about education and teaching, if there's no trust, you're not going to learn anything, for starters. And if there's little trust in the functionality of a place, it just dysfunctions, and people are unhappy. So extending trust, which is a challenge sometimes, just because, delegation is part of trust, or just setting somebody off to do something and not knowing how it's all going to turn out is part of trust. But if you don't do that, and you try to do everything yourself, or you try to micromanage everything, you drive yourself crazy and you drive everybody else crazy. So the Bhagavad Gita and the 6 Gita values are really helpful to me, for sure.
Thank you, but one thing I wanted to pick up on was trust, because I see that
Mm,
sometimes this is something I struggle, personally managing teams. Some people, sometimes you get this person that you know nothing about, before you build that rapport, but as a leader, you naturally need to delegate. So, how do you overcome that barrier? Because trust is mutual, right? Because they need to trust in you, and you need to trust in them. How do you go about building that trust, where it gets to a point where that mutual trust exists, so that you're able to lead or bring the best out of the people that you're supposed to be leading, or you know helping
yeah,
support,
yeah.
really?
It takes time, and it's like a bank account. You put deposits
Mm,
in, and sometimes there's withdrawals if things happen. So I think it's just it takes time, and if somebody's working together or serving together for many years, trust builds up. Um, Peter Burwash once said that trust until something happens and you don't trust, and then your trust is out the window for a while. Um, so yeah, I think, and again, for me, it starts with me. You know, how can I be trustworthy? Um, how can I
mm,
show up? How can I be in time if I say I'm going to be there? How can I take responsibility to do the thing that I said I'm going to do? Or how can I be honest if I'm
mm,
not able to do it? So the trust does start with us, and then that, because I'm able to do it with me, then I'm able to invite our others into a trusting relationship. Or when I'm asking them to do something, I'll say, yeah, I'm going to trust you with this. Let me know how it goes. So,
mm,
again, depends on the individual, depends on the context. It's some people, it shouldn't be foolish trust. It can be a smart trust. And of course, sometimes we're let down. Sometimes there's failure. Sometimes the trust is broken.
mm,
So I think it's just it's an ongoing process. But if you build a culture of trust and have expectations of people around that trust, and your trust is based on affection and appreciation and real belief of a person's capacity to do whatever it is they're going to be doing. It's kind of like with teenagers or kids going off to college. They say, should know the difference between right and wrong, and I'm going to trust that you're going to make the right choice. And that's often helpful for the kids or the adults or anybody to actually live into that trust, right? And if they fail, well, you have conversations, you're able to talk about it.
No, thank you, Varu. That was very helpful. And I know we spoke a little bit around leadership, and I think we touched a little bit about education, your background, and how, those principles that Prabhupada instilled were those that you've seen in the education sector. And the title today is actually of the session, Leadership as Education. So, what is the connection between leadership and education?
Mm. Well, a leader should be educated and um, and continue to
Mm,
educate himself. I think we come into this world and we learn from day one, and we should never stop learning. And in fact, the
mm,
practice of bhakti, the practice of Krishna consciousness, is just, we're learning more and more about Krishna, learning more and more about who we are, and learning.
mm,
One time in an interview with Prabhupada came into London, actually, I think it was in '69, and the interviewer asked him, "So, what have you come here to teach?" And Prabhupada said, "I'm trying to teach what you have forgotten." So life is lifelong learning, right? Life is
mm,
really about learning. And we've been given a goal that our job is to learn, according to Prabhupada, what we've forgotten, our relationship with Krishna, the spiritual world, and how to use everything, how to purify ourselves and go back there, or awaken our love for Krishna. So the interesting point about education in general, it is really a drawing out of what we already know, right?
mm.
And Krishna Bhakti, the same thing, the awakening, the uncovering of the self. So when it comes to leadership and education, and you look at the idea of leadership, say, in a society, that they really are meant to be looking out for the well-being of their those they are protecting. And, education changes everything. And not only just educating people in skills and knowledge, but we would say, and Prabhupada emphasizes this over and over again, leadership means character and education and character. And if you're not educating people on that, people are always being educated. So you're either going to let them get educated in all kinds of crazy things, or you're really going to say, please, this is knowledge. And this was why books were so important to Prabhupada, because books have power. And when you give people the right information and they're like, oh my God, now I know I'm a spirit soul, my body is temporary, so on and so forth. That empowers each and every one of us to be able to actually pull ourselves out of this world. So leadership is just naturally education. It's the same principle. You can give a man a fish, or you can teach him how to fish, right? And the whole idea of varnashram, the whole idea of becoming qualified, it's all an educational process. That's Krishna consciousness is wide open. Prabhupada says everybody can join, everybody can become guru. You learn, you study, you grow, you pass your exams, you become qualified by your behavior. The ultimate qualification is how you behave, right? So when you're talking about leadership and education, you're also, as a leader, trying to say, how and where can this person best serve? How can they learn more to become better at what they are naturally good at, so that they can be a very active and connected and deeply satisfied member of society? That's leadership, and that's education.
No, it's really interesting. And when you say the ultimate qualification is character, because we see, don't we, people who are on paper very educated, quote unquote, they may have a PhD, masters, degrees coming out of their ears, but then you see them, some of those people that don't necessarily cultivate the characteristics that you mentioned that leaders should possess, and either don't act by example, or don't have that compassion, or that right attitude towards leadership. And you see these people in very high positions, nobody likes them, and it's just all utter chaos. So yeah, it's really interesting, around the
Right.
point
And
that you mentioned.
it's the same for us as devotees. I mean, when you become a devotee, when you take up the practice of Krishna consciousness, you're automatically a leader, because Prabhupada really wanted us to become ladies and gentlemen, right? So how we behave is everything. We could be chanting 16 rounds, reading the Bhagavatam, doing the whole thing, but then we're not very pleasant, or we don't act in really sattvic ways, then we're not being leaders, right? No matter how externally qualified we are. So as devotees of Krishna, how our character is first and foremost, and the chanting and the practice is really meant to help us show up as better people in our day, so that we just, even if we don't open our mouth, I don't know, there's a famous quote about some preacher, and they say he was a great preacher and he hardly ever spoke, because by his just way of being, he influenced so many. So as devotees, how we carry ourselves, how we walk, how we talk, everybody sees it. And especially if you're in a position of leadership, everybody sees it. And I know that because people tell me, and I don't know they're watching or looking, but you're just really exposed. But I would challenge that all devotees who take up this practice owe it to Krishna to, walk their talk. And the practice is really meant to refine us, right? Really meant for that we can hold space in our families, or in our communities, or in our workplace, that, we make it a better place by our presence.
Prabhu, another area of discussion I kind of wanted to move into is, the practical elements of being a leader and leading a community of devotees. We spoke about various qualities and cultivating the character to
Mhm.
become good leaders that bring everybody together, that utilize everybody's best qualities and what have you. But we often see also, particularly in temples and around, not just in London or anywhere else, but often devotees end up just kind of being in leadership positions by default, or people just get to places, and not just in temples. Did you see this at work as well? So
Right.
how do we actually train somebody to become a leader? And and even though they've either irrespective of the point that whether they actually applied and got the leadership position, or like I said, just ended up
Right.
there by
Right.
default, how do we train them to become good leaders? Practical tips that you could offer.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think very often we end up in our temples because there may be a shortage, or somebody's been there for a long
Mm,
time and he's doing the needful, or she's doing the needful.
mm,
So I think as our movement grows and we develop, and there's some leadership training going on, um, but first to acknowledge that we need to invest in people and we need to support them. So if somebody is stepping into a leadership position, that we're able to actually ask them, or finance their
mm,
training, have them have a mentor. I don't think we give enough support to our
mm,
devotees who are taking up the mission full time. And I think you train leaders, particularly by ongoing training. We've all had that experience. You go to teacher training, but your real training is when you're in the
mm,
classroom. And the first half a year, you realize you know nothing, even though you've done 3 years of training, because that's where you learn. And so I think we need systems. I think we need systems where there's
mm,
ongoing support. I think there should be systems where we can bring in um, apprentices, or leaders can be paired with mentors, or that I should be required at least twice a year to take some online training, or leadership training, not necessarily within ISKCON, but just training that can give me the skills that I need to be better in doing what I do. So, and that goes only so far. So, I think you there's a number of things you should do, but I think just the culture. I think in ISKCON the culture should be, our Bhakti program is leadership training, right?
mm,
Our when we have devotees living in the temple, they should be all, no matter what services they do, they should be all seen as leader. And then those particularly in leadership positions need to be really supported. They also need to have room to make mistakes. They're not perfect. We learn. We do most of our learning by gaining experience, and most of our experience is gained when we do things the wrong way. There's no way to avoid that. You
mm,
can't avoid that. And some people are more natural community builders. I think leadership is just a lot about community building, about community care, about talking to people. There's a lot of
mm,
leaders in my community that are not in positions of leader, but they have positions of influence because
mm,
they're just community builders. They're people, and they care,
mm,
you know. And there's other people in my community who are just great with systems, and don't really interact much with people, but they have real
mm,
sharp views about taking decisions. There's a lot
mm,
of things in leadership is just you're a decision maker, and
mm,
that can also be a little intense, right? So I always favor ongoing training. I also favor reading books. I've done a lot of reading
mm,
on leadership, on, as Ravinder Swarup Prabhu calls them, in Boga books, just leadership positions in the world, or profiles of leaders, and watching. So it's a sharpening of the skills. Uh, and it's also a kind of, I would say, community of care that the elders, and we're missing this in our movement as well. I think that the elders
mm,
really are there to support the leaders, again, not to control them, but to support up and coming next generation, people who really are offering to step into it and have the skills and the Krishna conscious values to do that. So the elders are like, great, how can I support you? And really do circle around, just going, great, what have you learned from that? You know, defining leadership, such a broad thing. What is leadership, right? It's just, you don't know. And then, is it a small temple, medium temple, a large temple? Sometimes they call me community president, and I'm the, we get 500 people on a Sunday, and I don't know half of them. So am I a temple president? I'm a community president, the extended community president. So I think it's a moving target, but I think the best place to start is just to have regular conversations about what is leadership? What does leadership mean? And how can, in the culture of Krishna consciousness, and that's the culture of trust, the culture of spontaneous devotional service, the culture of inspiration to serve Krishna and dependency on Krishna, how can I best show up and do this service of taking responsibility for making sure everybody in this community, as much as possible, feels loved, cared for, and are trying their best to grow spiritually, right? So it's less about, books are important, building temples are important, there are important numbers, but it's really more about, the leadership position is really more about, if somebody's going out on book distribution, the leadership's important position is, how are you? How is your head? How is your heart? How is your family? How do you, how long do you think you can do this? Do you need a break? So I think leadership is a lot about really supporting and encouraging everybody to continue their education, to continue to build their skills, but also to take care of themselves. I like to say to people at the temple, because, when you live at a temple, you could have service 24/7 and still not do everything, right? And so I say, I don't want you to leave here and you haven't heard me say your service is important, but more important is your chanting of your japa, and having time to hear and chant. I want you to know that that's really important to me, because that's what drew us in the first place. Prabhupada says, first health, then sadhana, then service. We usually keep health last, service first, and sadhana kind of squeezed in between them. Because when your health is bad, you can't do sadhana, you can't chant well, you can't read well. You're just, the whole thing is spiraling out. So how do we give that message? You are important. You are rare souls who have taken to Krishna consciousness. How can we really, really, really strengthen you so that you can do wonderful service, but, that you can also have a sustainability about you? We love stories and we're drawn to stories of people, really being the heroes or the heroines, or, kind of martyrs for the cause, but it's not sustainable. And so many have left, or so many stay, but they're unhappy, or so many struggle, but they're afraid to talk about it. So we have to have a more sustainable model. And for me, it's a model that's more about being less, more about quality than quantity. Because if you have quality, quantity will come. So it's again, it comes back to it really is people before projects, because those same people will actually do huge projects if they're properly nurtured and cared for.
So probably we touched about that diverse. You said, that you see youngsters coming through, and how elders can help best, members of the congregation can best help get the best out of them. And it's not just the generational gap we see within ISKCON communities; it's the very vast demographic. It's a bit of a melting pot half the time, isn't it? With different ages,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
ethnicities and what have you. So, what do you see, particularly in the US? I think it is a little bit more diverse demographically than perhaps maybe communities within the UK. So, what leadership lessons could ISKCON learn around managing a growing demographically representative congregations within the US?
Um, I would say that each area is different. So, we very often have local areas, then we're connected nationally, and then we're connected internationally. And sometimes we don't get enough support or resources to build out locally, right? And I think we have to also have the model that we encourage initiatives in our town or in our city. So it's not like everything has to be centralized at the temple. The temple should be a resource that, hey, you've got a bhakti yoga studio over there. Can we be of service? Can we give you prasadam, right? How can we serve you? You have a whole programs going on there. Great. How can we be of service? So that the temple is, again, not trying to keep everything under their wing, but is saying, like Prabhupada did, go to San Francisco, go to London, we'll prep you a little bit. We're here to help you, to train you, to support you. And I think we're never going to be in every town and village if we don't start doing that. One time recently, I had to drive out to a place in Maryland, and I was driving, and it was just unlimited shopping malls, unlimited houses. And I just thought, how are we ever going to touch? These people are never going to come to the temple. So then I was thinking, well, we should do this. We should have a bhakti. You know how they have yoga teacher training, 100 hours,
yoga
200
teacher
hours.
training,
I was thinking we should have a bhakti yoga teacher training course and you wouldn't even have to be initiated for this one, but that you could train people to go into community libraries or community spaces or yoga studios in their local areas, and they could teach the Gita values, they could teach mantra meditation, they could introduce Prabhupada's books, and in very beautiful ways. That way you're helping people create local communities, right? And you don't have to wait till we have a pure devotee to do that. I would even say, I know people who have been coming to my temple for years. They're not initiated yet, but they're solid devotees. And with a bhakti yoga teacher training program, they could be certified to go and speak in their local areas. And it's not, it might evolve into a regular group, or it could be just a class on stress management at your local library. In America, libraries, you have rooms you can rent out for free, you have community centers, and there's yoga studios in every corner, practically in every shopping area. So I think for me, that's how we gain diversity, is that we really, again, the word is kind of overused, empower, but we really try to set up systems that, hey, we think you'd be great at doing this. Why don't you take some training, and then you can go out and share Krishna consciousness. You can go out and teach Krishna consciousness. It's not rocket science. And then you can share Prabhupada's books, because when I read Prabhupada's books, I was convinced. When people get Prabhupada's books, they get the tools to help themselves spiritually. So that's one way that I believe can be helpful. The other interesting thing is that we always have new people coming to our temple. Every Sunday we get a ton of new people coming to our temple, and but new people then eventually join, and they become your old people. And so you have to have programs that go deep, right, for those who have been around for a while and want to go deeper in their practice, as well as a nice wide open door for new people to come in and check it out, right? So and then having our presentations that are relevant, that are interesting, having beautiful. Here's the thing: we have the best food, we have the best kirtans. having our kirtans really intentionally thought out with your best singers, beautiful sound, beautiful instruments, right? Those of us who've been devotees for a long time, well, we just love kirtan, even sometimes if it's badly done, because we're just like all together and having fun. So it's like we'll drink out of a chipped cup because we know the drink is good. But for somebody coming in, when things are done beautifully, and I think it's a disservice to Krishna's holy name when we don't put time into actually a beautiful presentation, when we don't put time into how we serve prasadam, when we don't put time into creating like really first-class prasadam that's served in amazing ways on, compostable plates and spoons. But we have something beautiful, and we should just keep trying to give something beautiful. And we've prasadam, we have kirtan, and then we have this amazing philosophy. And so I think for us to change hearts, we just have to really come back to those three basics and do them really, really well, according to our location, according to time, pace, and circumstance. And then we have to encourage those who come to take it up in their local area, and we have to have training programs to help them do that.
The grassroots point, the Bhakti Yoga teacher training is really interesting. Is this something you've started implementing, Prabhu, or is it something that you're looking to implement?
Yeah, I haven't started it. There's so many things I'd love to do, but but I've always thought that, because people line up to do teacher training programs, right? They do yoga teacher training programs all the time. And it's hard enough when you're an initiated devotee to get some kind of training. We're actually an educational movement, but we don't do a lot of education on many levels, for our people. And so, but my idea was, let's make it even simpler. Let's make it so that people feel confident to go and share. For most people, like, oh, I can't lead a kirtan, or I don't know what to say. But let's have some really step-by-step easy programs that we're giving people confidence to go into these spaces. There's so much suffering. People are just waiting for Krishna, and we need to go out to them. But we need to help people equip people with how to do that.
And I think another very important point you've mentioned is, particularly in very demographically diverse areas, it's not just attracting people, it's how we keep it. And another thing we're terribly bad at is, we'll do huge outreach programs, 100 people come through the door, like 2 people come out of it, and 6 months later you see them still see them at the temple. So it's just that, actually, like you mentioned, not just empowering those, giving those almost individuals ingredients or a template to kind of go out and empower, but also once you've got the attention or the interest of capture the interest of those individuals, and cultivating those individuals through the I know we call it pipeline, pipeline of bhakti, almost, where they actually where they're helped and nourished and cultivated to kind of go through their sadhana, and to kind of go on that bhakti journey. And I think that's a big part that gets neglected often, because we do the outreach, okay, we're doing, but you just don't see whether that kind of education almost is sustained.
No, it takes organization, it takes full-time people. Where a lot of our movement runs on part-time people, especially because they're working, and if you're part-time, you just don't have a lot of time to do it. And I think local gurus need to happen. I think we really need to have local gurus who really understand Shiksha Guru in a better way, so that devotees can take care of X number of people locally. So I think a lot can be done, and I think a lot should be done. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but I know, because I look at churches who are really successful. There's one church I follow, and they have all their, like, I think they have about at least 70,000 people, all in small groups in their areas, right? So they come to the church over the weekend, but the lead person of the church says, our church is actually in the small groups, because that's where they talk about their spiritual life. Because the other thing to keep in mind is life is messy, life is difficult. So people can come and be fired up for a while because they're young and they're free and they're not married, and then something happens and they get married, and life is just, it's just messy. And people want to come and volunteer, but something happens. Or in where we live, people have to drive at least 30-40 minutes before, like in London, right, before you get to the temple. And so it's not so easy. So that's another push for kind of local sangha. But this church who does that, they have a huge just organizational, they have hired full-time people to help facilitate people's spiritual life. So you either have a very organized Chopati model, or models in Mumbai where you have big brahmacharis, numbers of devotees who are full-time, engaged in taking care of people. Or in the States, we don't have that. So you either have to have, a key number of full-time people, because even if you say you had a full-time volunteer coordinator, a full-time small groups coordinator, a full-time youth coordinator, then they have time to work with, part-time or weekend volunteers to do something good. So you need a critical number of people who are really meditating on it to make something happen. Otherwise, we'll mosey along and we'll, a little bit here, a little bit there, but we're not at full capacity for sure.
No, thank you, Prabhu. One other area I wanted to pick up on was this idea of, you're obviously Vaishnavi, be in a leadership position, and there's often, I don't know, for cultural reasons or what have you within ISKCON, there's this, and it's not just within ISKCON, among certain demographics in very traditional societies, this concept or this idea or stereotype, so to speak, that women shouldn't be in leadership positions. And I've often even heard devotees say, there are, these are not being leaders isn't, female duties to do. Women should be just making garlands, cooking bhog, cleaning the temple room, these sort of stereotypes. So what do you think, how do you think that we should address this idea that women aren't suited, for leadership or managerial roles? And how do we actually, obviously you're doing a great job being a temple president, and actually the Bhaktivedanta man has got Vishaka Prabhu who's doing a great job. So how do we change these perceptions, or what could we do to change this narrative that some people seem to be still peddling about in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think there'll always be people peddling that, and I think look around. There's a lot of women, not just in the position of temple president, but are involved in holding responsible positions in temples, in different ways. Staying at home and managing a house and kids is a super responsible position. I think making beautiful garlands for Krishna is a managerial position. I think the tendency to minimize is just not a Vaishnava quality. I think if somebody is qualified for the job, as Prabhupada said, if somebody's qualified to be a guru, then they should do it. There's lots of great women managers. There are lots of not great women managers. There's lots of men leaders managers. There's not lots of not great men leader managers. For me, I just, if the person is willing to do the service, whether they're a man or a woman, I'll take what comes, really. I don't have a big selection pool to choose from, right? There's not a lot of people want to live in temples these days, but yeah, it's a skill, it's a talent. Some people have it, some people don't. And I think it's a shame. I think women do bring some, people say, oh, it depends. Like some people think I'm a really tough leader, right? And I'm like, what? I'm not so tough. My father was a general in the Irish army. They're like, oh, now we know. Well, now we know. But people perceive you differently, right? But just because maybe you're not, you're able to make decisions, or I'm not. So, I have experience, so I don't really get so mental about things. But I just think you should ignore it, really. Life's too short. And some people are going to feel like that. And men feel like that. Some women feel like that. But that's not Prabhupada's mood. No, it was never Prabhupada's mood. Rukmini Prabhu tells this beautiful story about how Prabhupada was describing all the different places that devotees could go and open temples. She was 16 at the time, and she was sitting in front of Prabhupada, and she said, "And the girls too, Prabhupada? Can they do that?" And Prabhupada said, "There is no difference. You can all do this service." So, especially in the West, maybe in India, although I question that as well. There's lots of women leaderships in positions. India had a prime minister. There's lots of women gurus in different spiritual communities in India. So it's a matter of character and qualification. It's really not a matter of male, female, in my experience, and I think we should just, personally, I kind of just ignore it.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think it's just one thing acknowledging that it's your character that matters, and if you're qualified to do a certain role, your gender shouldn't stand in the way of doing it. But in terms of actually empowering ladies to ignore, these kind of stereotypes and things, I think
Yeah.
it can be quite challenging. So, is there any advice you can give apart from obviously get on and do it? Because some ladies are better at self motivating, and women and men operate very differently, even in leadership positions. Research has proven that women and men, when it comes to being a leader, due to their, physical, emotional needs and different things that they prioritize, they're very different. So, how can we encourage ladies that are perhaps feeling a little bit demotivated by, these kind of comments to kind of take up those positions? Or what can ISKCON as a movement perhaps do to encourage those qualified ladies to fulfill their service in the best possible way?
Speak about it, understand Prabhupada's. I think understanding Prabhupada's mood and mission is really important, and listening regularly to Prabhupada. And then again, local leaders, if people want to step forward and do some service, it shouldn't be automatic. Oh, just because you're a woman and we want to show that we believe in women, you should do it. But it's a personal thing, and encourage them to find. I would encourage women to find, mentors or other women to talk to, or men in the community, or talk to your local leaders and say, do you have that mood here, and is it a problem? And if it is a problem, maybe that's not the place for them, and they go find communities that maybe it's less of a problem for. So you have to be, again, it comes to education, and it comes to trusting yourself, and trusting at different times in your life. You may have inclination or inspiration to serve in a responsible position in ISKCON or in your workplace, but we're talking about ISKCON now. And you might get some feedback that says women shouldn't do that, but that's actually not true according to Prabhupada. So, and especially in the West, maybe in India, Prabhupada was a little more careful, but during his time, he would have, Jamuna and all those ladies lead and speak and manage, and temple presidents. So for me, that's not Prabhupada's mood. And that would be the message I would give to ladies. And if there's a service, if there's a need at your temple, if you feel inspired to do it, step in and do it. I don't, I think, and people are grateful to have somebody come in and say, but we should be grateful. And again, I think the elders should be grateful. Say, wow, thanks for stepping up to serve. Let's talk about it. Let's see how we can make this happen. But just on a basic level, that wasn't Prabhupada's mood, and that should be good enough. And we really need to keep the spirit of Prabhupada alive and well in our movement as we grow. He's the founder Acharya for a reason, and he set the tone and the mood. And not everybody wants to, not all women want to come out and serve, and that I can do it. My kids grown up, I'm financially independent, so I have time to do it. Other people when I was in India and my son was born, I spent the first 5 years at home until he went to school. So staying at home and taking care of the home is such an important service to do. It shouldn't be seen as, or you're less intelligent, so stay at home, or you're less this, you're less that. So, this man-woman thing, it's not just in ISKCON, it's everywhere, right? So, let it in one ear and out the other, and 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 choose. Not only for just being a woman, but in general, the service we choose to do and who we choose to serve with. These are important decisions because it's important that we have like-mindedness. It's important that we feel valued and appreciated in our service. It's important that we make a commitment to service, that we're saying going to do something, I'm definitely going to show up and do it. And it's important that we approach service as a loving offering to Krishna. It's not about position or power. It's not about I'm going to prove it to everybody. It's like, can I help? Krishna, how can I serve you in this way? Is this a service? Is this the right service for me? Or what's my best service? Where could I best situate myself so that I can give something back because I received so much? So go to those kind of questions because Prabhupada never stopped anybody from service, and Mahaprabhu never stops anybody from service.
No, thank you, Prabhu. And one other thing that I think we cannot ignore when it comes to leadership is, leadership is, as you know, as a leader, it's not all roses. There is conflicts inevitably that you need to resolve. So, what see ways that you could, as a leader, resolve conflicts within a community, particularly in a devotee community, because at work and context, it's a bit different. You can have various, the carrot and the stick, but within a devotee
Yeah.
community, like you said, you need to make sure people feel valued and everybody is a volunteer. So conflict resolution, I can imagine, can get a bit tricky. So how do we go about resolving conflicts, particularly within a devotee community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are a lot of conflicts because we're humans and we're messy, even as we're trying to be devotees. And sometimes I say religious movements have more conflict because our faith is on the line sometimes, right? One of my favorite sentences is, it's not about being right, it's about the relationship. So for me, I think when there's conflict, sometimes I try to let it sort itself out. So either it's conflict between devotees over some stuff, how they were dealt with, or so many reasons for conflict, expectations or bad communications, right? Sometimes we'll meet and talk about it, try to do some kind of mediation or at least a conversation. I often will leave it for a day or two until emotions will come down. Sometimes it's just a polarity to be managed. Like some people just, they don't love everybody, but we respect them and we have affection. That's why the word affection is so nice, right? We have affection, even though we don't interact with, we may, sadly, some people would go through phases where they don't want to, just be nice to each other. I think sometimes people need to vent, and that's why becoming a good listener is important. They need to really vent out their emotions if they feel they've been badly treated or they've been cheated or whatever. And then by venting and then clarifying and helping people solve their own problems rather than trying to fix everything. There will be relationship issues. It's just part of living life, right? And different people are in different phases of their lives. Some are new, some are young, some are been old and have been around ISKCON forever, so they're a little crusty sometimes. But one really important, so in that sense, I try to deal with it in a personal way, especially if you've been in a community for a long time. You know people and you know their kind of trigger points, or or sometimes the conflict is unexpected. And one important lesson I learned a couple of years back, because I had uh, there was quite a big issue with just differences of opinion on our board of trustees, and um, while it was being resolved, I wanted to speak to so many people about it, kind of to defend my position, and you know, say I didn't do anything wrong, but I controlled myself, and I only worked with a few people that were involved in sorting out the situation, and I saw how powerful that was to actually keep my mouth shut, because it didn't become a community wide thing. It didn't become, oh, she said this, he said this. It didn't start everybody taking sides and defending each other, and I felt that came directly from me not making a choice not to speak about it, and kind of, you know, this tendency to defend ourselves, right, is huge. The false ego will immediately like want to say, no, I didn't do anything wrong. It was all that. So that's been a big lesson for me, that um, really, and it didn't split into the community, and those devotees who we had disagreements with kept still felt welcome at the temple, right? They still kept their services going, because it didn't become mean spirited or animosity, or again, us and them. So the power of listening, 2 ears, one mouth, the power of speaking less, listening more. I really learned that valuable lesson. And I think I've had to practice becoming better at it. My husband, he's an ISKCON resolved, so he's very good at listening. I had to, I used to be very good at just telling people what to do and thinking that's going to fix everything. But over the years, I've seen how it's just so much, you get a much better result. And it comes back to, again, trusting, listening, trusting that this person really knows, because all of us know when we do something wrong anyway. Nobody needs to tell us. And all of us know basically what's the right thing to do, but we just need somebody to help us work through it. So those are a few things that I do to help not let conflicts escalate, and to kind of make room for some small conflicts. Because I think if you make room for the smaller conflicts, then the bigger conflicts don't, you know, we don't hide behind the bigger conflicts, if that makes sense. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I think I muted myself.
Okay.
When you said the power of listening, it reminded me of a Shakespearean quote. Shakespeare said, "Give each man thy ear, but few thy tongue." So it's the idea of
Exactly.
listening.
Exactly.
So, and yeah, it is difficult sometimes when you get caught up in situations, but absolutely, and so often when people are so, I see this when I manage people. With some of my line reports, all they want is to vent. Sometimes all somebody
Yeah.
needs is just somebody to sit and listen, be like, I completely understand. And then they just kind of go on a rant for about 10 minutes by themselves. And it's just like, okay, so
Yeah.
what was your problem? And, they're
Yeah.
just not even a problem in the end. But,
Yeah.
it's just the power of listening. That's very powerful. Thank
It
you, Prabhu.
is. And conflict can really, it's very disabling, and it can take up a lot of space in your mind and in your head. It can really, really um, affect our
Mm.
chanting and everything. So I think our culture has to get better at not being afraid to disagree, but how to do it in ways that are, you know, honor the person, right? Hate the sin, not the sinner, so to speak.
Mm.
Because when it becomes filled with ill will, or not, 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 yeah, it just becomes disturbing. But what
Mm.
to do? The nature of the world is disturbed anyway, and we get affected by that. But listening definitely helps to keep it from becoming a forest fire, in my experience.
Prabhu, I'm conscious of the time, and I just wanted to pick up a question we've had from Scarlett, one of our viewers, and she says, "Hare Krishna, how to do? I think she means how to deal when a business or operations manager or somebody that's responsible, essentially, that doesn't behave according to the principles, do you just accept and pretend that everything is fine? So I suppose she's getting at the point that we said, the leaders need to walk the talk. But if somebody in a position of authority you see is not walking the talk, what do we do? Do we just accept and pretend that it's okay?
No, we talk about it, and ideally, you talk to them about it, because especially in a devotional community, we're very much judged. We're judged by the greater congregation, right? And if there's some problem or some challenge, or there's the acting in ways that are not in line with our principles, or even with our, mood of service or mood of dealing with people, then yeah, you have to say, yeah, how are you? What's troubling you? Because you seem to be struggling with this, or you this isn't happening well, or we need to talk about this because it can't continue. And for me, in a temple, we're kind of protectors of Prabhupada's movement, and trying to create a space where people can come in peacefully and be with Krishna for a while and hear something, take a little prasad and go home. So, somebody's got to do it. And if that person's not doing that well, then that's okay, but it has to be done well. So either it's you change and you get better and you do it well, or somebody else does it. So I think accepting and pretending everything's okay is a bad idea. And it's awkward to have those conversations, but it's more awkward and more damaging to ignore it without saying something. And, and if government places, they'll give, warning 1, warning 2, or this or that. Somebody sadhana might be great, but behavior might be terrible. So I think it's a job of a leader or manager to try to bring everything back into a better balance and highlight, yeah, you're doing this great and you're doing that great, but this is an area that's of concern, and can we talk about it a little bit? So, yeah.
But Prabhu, what if the leadership has issues, and if you're a congregational member, that nobody's perfect, we're all humans, right?
Right,
And if, say, a devotee was to, I think this is the problem when she says a business operations manager, I think if you see somebody in a position of authority not acting according to the right
who should you
character,
talk about? Oh, all right.
yes,
So if
how
you're,
can you
yeah.
approach it? I think, yeah.
Yeah, well, if it's not the temple president, then you could talk to the temple president. If it is the temple president, then you may talk to other senior people in the community that you trust, and just say, I'm worried about this. I have a concern here. If you're not getting anywhere, then you could possibly talk to the GBC if that person comes around. Or be brave enough to talk to the person themselves, approach, and again, we have to have ways of being able to express a concern and trust that it might not be true. I've heard these things. I'm not sure they're true, or I've seen some things. Help me understand how that's going. There's ways to have these conversations. You could also, this is what ISKCON Resolve is set up for. That's a neutral, ISKCON Resolve is a neutral organization, not under ISKCON, but part of ISKCON, but a little bit outside of management. So people can go with confidence and say, I'm at this temple and this person's like doing crazy stuff, and I need help. I don't know what to do. What would you advise? And sometimes they can get involved and help, or they'll have good advice for you. So that's a safe way that you don't expose yourself to the local management, but you have ways to get help for concerns you see in local management. And concerns do happen. We shouldn't be in any illusion that we're all sincere devotees, and everything's a-okay. We've been around ISKCON long enough to see that things aren't okay. And oftentimes when things are exposed, we're like, oh yeah, I had a feeling, or yeah, I should have seen that red flag. So we have to be brave enough and have systems in place like ISKCON Resolve, or at local temples, encourage people to speak up like I would say to encourage people to say, if you see anything here that concerns you, let me know, or let somebody know if you're afraid to talk to me directly. So that way we look out for each other, and ultimately, who's ever struggling or doing a crazy thing needs help, and just
Mm.
ignoring it is not good.
No, I hope that was helpful to you, Scarlett. Yeah, thank you for your question. And we're approaching the near the end of time, Prabhu. Thank you so much for those valuable points you made and for sharing your experience, as a leader and how you bring communities together and how you overcome those challenges, and also the principles that sort of underpin how you lead the community of devotees where you are based in Washington, D.C. Before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share? Any hints and tips, messages of inspiration, or anything to our viewers at home, Prabhu?
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, and thank you for listening. Um, Prabhupada really is the leader of all leaders, and in my experience, we can just learn all about how to be, um, how to show up and serve, and how to lead. We're all leaders. I believe everybody who's an adult is a leader, and whether we're at home or in work or wherever we are, leadership means we look people in the eye, we care, and we help, right? Leadership is a role that assists others. So just look for opportunities to serve, look for opportunities to take the lead on something, which means let's try this, or here, I'll get this started, or here, let me help here today. I'll help with the serve out, or I'll lead this or that. So don't let the word leader or leadership restrict what you do. You don't need a position to influence and bring good things about. You just need energy and inspiration, and the Maha Mantra should will fill us up with that. And Prabhupada's, great movement that really has so much to offer the world in terms of care and well-being and ultimate spiritual freedom. Uh, yeah, go wild with it, run with it, and and change the world in your small corner of the world.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was very helpful. The point you made about, doing things in your capacity and not let the thought of leadership intimidate you, because it doesn't have to be, you're the prime minister or president of a country. Even if you're doing a little service and you see somebody not there to do something, just kind of sorting it out can be leading, can be taking those little initiatives to make
Exactly.
things better. And it doesn't always have to be a big title, big
Yeah. You see
responsibility.
the garbage pail overflowing in your temple? Go find a bag, take it out, change it, fix it in. That's leadership. You're at
Mm,
home by yourself with two kids, be a leader with them. It's everywhere. We just have to, step into it, see it and do it.
mm. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for all your valuable insight. And I think one thing I personally took is we talk about leaders, and Prabhupada epitomize what it is to be a leader. And it reminds me of a quote from John Maxwell, which says, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." And Prabhupada certainly did that. So I
Lovely.
hope people could look up to nobody else. People don't have devotees doesn't have to Google, research on leaders. We've got, the best leader we could possibly ask for in the form of Prabhupada. So hopefully your thoughts and your sort of little hints and tips would inspire people to act by example, lead by example, and follow the principles and be a leader according to your best capacity. So thank you so much, Prabhu, for your time, and I hope the viewers at home took something out of this episode. We'll be back with you with episode 18 next week. Have a lovely rest of the day. Hare Krishna.